Australia was a pretty innovative area for motorcycles in those early days. The first recorded bike made in Australia was in Brisbane, which was just a motor, and that was relatively crude.
Most motorcycles at about that period had actually evolved out of bicycles. They took a bicycle and added an engine to it, literally a clip-on arrangement. If you can distinguish that, I would call a motorised bicycle, and then came the motorcycle proper, and this would be one of the very first motorcycles in my estimation.
Well, David Spencer, born in 1870, and he was a POM. He must have lived in the Ipswich area for a number of years. Round about 03, 04, that period, he built his first bike. By 1906, he'd moved to Milton and he set himself up there as an engineer, and he specialised in carburettors, and he was also a founder member of the Queensland Motorcycle Club.
But he was certainly a trailblazer, was David Spencer. He was certainly a clever man. Bear in mind, this bike was produced right at the beginning of motorcycles. The system in the early days into the 20th century was buy an engine, buy a gearbox, buy the wheels, buy the hubs, and become just really assemblers. David Spencer, he manufactured motorcycles in the true sense. He developed his own bike. He made all the parts himself, and parts which you wouldn't normally expect a man on his own to be producing.
Whether he made the frames or not, I'm not sure. He certainly did everything else. As regards the engines, it was his design. Some of the things he did took years to become standard in motorcycle design. The carburettor is his design, his manufacture, and he made them for other people. And they are certainly ahead of their time.
His ideas were quite sound. He got around the idea of how to vaporise the fuel and get it into the motor. We know they were his carburettor designs. So, you know, when you think that these things were happening at the beginning of the motorcycle era, it's quite significant, I believe. Given the time frame that he was making carburettors, I strongly suspect that there were other manufacturers who might have borrowed his designs. It's a single gear, if you like, setup where the engine drives directly to the back wheel. No clutch, no gearbox. To change that ratio to the back wheel, the engine pulley can be adjusted to spread the cheeks of the pulley, and that affects the ratio to the back wheel.
One of the things that I personally have never seen is his control. His three-tiered lever, so the top lever on that was for the ignition. The next lever was for the air, more like a choke in the carburettor, and the bottom lever is the one that gets the most use, is the actual throttle, governing the speed.
Typically, motorcycle manufacturers split those functions. They split the ignition function from the carburettor function. Spencer, in his wisdom, put them all in one place. When I think about it, I think that was a smart idea. So you did it all with one hand. It was something that remains unique to Spencer.
He had detachable cylinder head. 90+% would have had non-detachable cylinder heads of that period.
In most early bikes, there are two cams, one to lift the exhaust valve and one to lift the inlet valve. Spencer used a single cam, and the quality of his workmanship was superb, again, considering there wasn't a standard to follow. He was setting the pace. In all those components in the motor actually got his name stamped on them. Things that you won't see unless you open the engine, but they were his ideas, and maybe he was truly proud of them, and I think rightly so.
He was the top of the tree, if you like, in innovation and machining locally.
Right, starting the Spencer, like most veteran bikes, there's a bit of a procedure.
The rider would have possibly put it on the stand, made sure the oil was in there, made sure the petrol's in there, then set the controls, give it a good old pedal, got it going, warmed it up, happy with everything. Yeah, sounds good.
And then you shut it down. You can't just kick it off the stand. It'll be a little bit exciting if you did. So you then take it off the stand, you secure the stand up, which folds up to form the back carrier. You've now got to get the bike moving, so the back wheel's driving the engine.
Get on the bike and start pedalling down the road. Get up a reasonable speed, let the valve lifter go, and off you go. He was also the first motorcyclist to go up the old toll bar road to Toowoomba without having to get off his bike. Now, he probably used the pedals to help him up there.
It was known as, back in the day, as light pedal assistance. You could hop up on the pedals and give it a bit of assistance and hopefully get yourself over the top of that big hill. The braking system as fitted is I won't use a nasty expression. Let's just say it's not very effective. If you remember as a small lad on your bicycle that is, you probably tried that front brake without a lot of success anyhow. But bear in mind, you weren't trying to stop the same amount of momentum and weight as you do with a motorcycle. The only other way is to use what they call engine braking. You might have heard the big diesel trucks going down the road with the engine braking. It was that kind of thinking. You can, to a limited extent, use that on these old bikes, but it does limit it. But there is a certain amount of engine braking.
The front brake is worth looking at. The linkage. The Brits and the Continentals had a different system. This one has a radial arms that take the torque as the brake is applied. The others just had a post in a guide. I like this system better.
This current project started probably 2-3 years ago. The Spencer machine that we've got was owned by Dave Detmar at one stage. He acquired ownership and in his wisdom donated it to the museum, I think about 25 years ago. I
hadn't got very far with any restoration with it, and that's when I decided the museum would be the better place to look after it.
The club had a 50-year celebration coming up, and Dave came up with the idea that wouldn't it be nice as part of that 50-year celebration to see the old Spencer restored and on display.
I thought, I wonder what's happened to the Spencer.
There was an agreement reached that they would give us all the parts they had that David originally donated to them. We'd put the old girl back together again.
When we first got it, it was a box of bits, literally. The engine was actually probably screwed together. There was a frame, there was a forks, these are all separate, a set of handlebars, bits of front brake. There were no wheels, and it was missing its rear stand. But I'm happy with the end result there. I quite enjoyed making that.
That was the big project, was to get this collection of correct period parts together using where we could the originals. And some of those may require a bit of touching up and a bit of restoring in their own right. There were certain parts we identified very quickly that were totally missing.
The frame was there. The tank is more or less as you see it. It's in pretty good nick.
We've kept it as close to original as we possibly could. We managed to get photographs of the other Spencer machine that's down in Wollongong. Some made parts for the carburetor that were missing, so we got that reassembled.
Personally, I'm very happy with the outcome. When I was putting it together, I measured what we call the balance factor. Typical balance factor of that size of bike would be in the high 60s. The old Spencer's 28, so it was jogging around a bit.
In the modern day shock horror, you'd never ride a bike with a balance factor in that order.
But I guess that's what Spencer had. I've used rivets a lot more than I would have normally done, because I think that's what he would have done. He wouldn't have welded that. He would have used a rivet.
So we missed the 50-year, but the idea of restoring the Spencer was always one that we'd committed to. We've got several members who, myself included, are all starting to age a little bit, and the skills that some of us have developed around these early motorbikes are not going to be there for too much longer. So all of that wrapped into one, and it was a great project.
Having had an association with a lot of old bikes over a long time, I knew pretty much what it should be like, and I'm quite happy with what I've done here. And I'm always aware or think that David Spencer's looking over my shoulder. It's a queer thing.
You know, we certainly think that it's the historic nature of motorcycling is something that needs to be preserved. That's what our club is all about, and I think the Spencer was kind of the ultimate, if you like, example of that preservation.